Welcome everyone to the webinar, Building Better Cities with Young Children and Families. My name is Amanda O'Rourke. I am the Executive Director of 880 Cities. I am joined by Rosanna Tudo, Project Manager at 880 Cities, who was instrumental in this project. So here we are your hosts for today and very excited to share with you the findings of this report, generously funded and supported by you, the Bernard Van Leer Foundation. I understand we have people joining us from a number of different countries and time zones, so thank you all for taking the time to listen to us today and to talk about this important topic and one that means a lot to me. This is me with my kids on a typical morning in Toronto, which is where 880 Cities is based and where Rosanna and I are sitting today. I was personally very excited to work on this project, not just in my role as executive director, but as a mother navigating the city with 3 little ones daily, walking, bicycling, using transit, visiting parks, and knowing how much better our city could be if we thought more about the needs of these little people and the people who care for them. Toronto is a big city and, like many North American cities, a very auto-oriented one. Not a day goes by that I don't feel the needs of young children and their caregivers have not been considered and certainly not prioritized. In honor of International Women's Day today, I'd also like to pose a question for consideration and reflection. What would our cities look like if women designed them? So here's our plan for the next hour. I'm going to start with a very short introduction to 880 Cities. Then Rosanna will take you through our research process and some highlights of the report. Then we have Tricia and Celine from Child to Child, who were interviewed and featured in the report. They're going to talk about their work. We're very excited to have them here today. And then we'll have some time for questions at the end. So 880 Cities, who are we? We are a nonprofit organization based in Toronto, Canada, as I mentioned before. Our mission is to improve the quality of life for all people living in cities, no matter their age, ability, or socioeconomic status. Over the last 10 years, we have worked with and challenged over 250 different cities on 5 continents to use the simple but powerful 880 concept when designing their streets and public spaces. To do this, we simply ask the question, what if everything we did in our cities was great for an 8-year-old and an 80-year-old? We believe it will be great for all. So now that you know about the 880 concept, you might be thinking, why 880 and what is it that you actually do? So for question 1, the reason we focus on children and older adults is because we know that modern childhood and older adulthood in cities around the world is increasingly characterized by limited freedom and independence, reduced opportunities for social engagement and physical activity in public spaces, and few opportunities to participate in community building and decision making. We want to help create cities we want to grow up in and grow old in. For question 2, what do we actually do? The answer is we do a number of things. We advise city governments. We produce publications like this one. We develop plans for open streets and better walking and bicycling. We animate parks and public spaces, and most importantly, we work with community, together with community, and we engage with them. We often find ourselves as an instigator and convener. So we instigate this new way of thinking about cities, and then we convene all the players, both on the government side and community side. We work at City Hall with mayors and elected officials, and we work in church basements with community organizers. One of the key services that we provide cities is what we call unconventional engagement. Everyone has a voice. We provide the megaphone is kind of our tagline. We work with cities to come up with new strategies to reach the hard to reach groups. So we're very deliberate about this. Specifically children, older adults, youth, and low income communities, so that policies, plans, and projects actually change. So for us, it's not just about the engagement itself, but it's what cities do with the engagement that really counts. This picture is in here to show you guys just how excited we are to be here today working on this topic with our partners at the Bernard Van Leer Foundation, and also just to give you an idea of how we work. So we not only just dive right into projects, we also think that engagement should look a lot more like this: fun, exciting, and never boring, and less so like it often looks like this. We ourselves have done quite a bit of engagement with children and created participation strategies with children. And we also know that many cities are starting to put more resources into engagement with children and youth and teens and adults as well. And we also see an exciting, burgeoning movement of interest in child-friendly cities around the world, which is also fantastic. But the 0 to 5 age group, not so much. A lot of participation strategies aimed at children doesn't really consider this group. This was clearly a gap in our own methodology and an area we wanted to investigate further. We were curious, how would our methodology change if we focused on this particular age group, as well as caregivers and pregnant women? We know, and of course we don't have to tell you at BVLF, that experiences in the earliest years of life have the most profound effect on a child's healthy development. Finding out how our cities can be more responsive and sensitive to young children, their caregivers, and pregnant women, and give them a real voice in the planning and decision-making process is critical. These were the questions we set out to answer. One, which cities are the pioneers in inclusive civic engagement processes with families and caregivers with young children? Two, what strategies have produced the best results for this group? And three, what are some key engagement principles to consider when working with the specific target group? For the purposes of this webinar, we are going to talk mostly about question number 3, and I would encourage everyone here to read the report that is available on our website, 880 Cities website, as well as Bernard Van Leer's website, to see the full context of the report. We're going to focus today on question number 3, but I'll also talk briefly at the end about the other 2 questions. Now I'm going to hand it over to Rosanna, who will talk about specific barriers and key principles with working with this group.
Thanks, Amanda. So this project would not have been possible without the help of many, many people around the world. In total, we interviewed 24 experts from 17 countries about their experiences engaging young children, pregnant women, and caregivers. Since there are so few examples of people working directly within the city building field who engage with this target group, we decided to expand the scope of our research to include experts from other sectors as well, such as public health and early childhood education. What was most important for us was that their methodology for engaging this target group was able to be translated to the field of city building, that is, urban planning, architecture, design, and policymaking. Many of the people we interviewed expressed that there were many barriers when it came to encouraging the participation of young children, families, and pregnant women in their initiatives. For example, lack of free time, lack of resources, so on and so forth. Nonetheless, the benefits of engaging this target group are many. By participating, young children and their caregivers have a say about the issues and decisions that affect their lives. They're able to learn new skills and develop a sense of connection with their wider community. By understanding the world through their lens, we can design programs and services that better reflect their needs. Based on our research, we developed 14 best practices for engaging children 0 to 5, pregnant women, and caregivers in the city building process. For the purposes of this webinar, however, we distilled those 14 best practices into 4 core overarching principles, which are: 1. Make engagement comfortable and convenient. 2. Make engagement reciprocal. 3. Make engagement playful. And 4. Make engagement a leadership opportunity. I'll go through each of the 4 principles, and for each one, I'll also talk briefly about a case study or two to illustrate that principle. From what we've seen, however, the best initiatives typically engage young children and families. From what we've seen, however, the best initiatives that engage young children and families in city building fulfill most, if not all, of the principles simultaneously. So I'll start with the first principle, which is make engagement comfortable and convenient. What does this mean? This really requires paying close attention to when and where your engagement takes place so that young children and families face as few barriers as possible to participating. Creating a truly child-centered engagement approach means first thinking of the environments that make young children most comfortable, creative, and expressive. Outside, in a familiar setting, in a playful space, with freedom of movement and surrounded by trusted caregivers is a great start. Places like schools, daycares, libraries, and community centers already host children's programs. Many of the case studies we examined partnered directly with these institutions to incorporate engagement activities into existing children's programming. This requires working with the institution's administration to ensure that your engagement initiative aligns with their educational objectives. As mentioned, families with young children are a very busy unit with many competing priorities that make it hard to participate in civic life. This means engaging young children and families in spaces they normally frequent, during their regular routines, or even their own homes. This is central to the approach that Young Lives uses. Young Lives is a longitudinal study of childhood poverty in Ethiopia, India, Peru, and Vietnam, conducted by Oxford University. The goal of the project is to identify the drivers and impacts of child poverty to help policymakers engage in evidence-based decision-making. For children aged 7 and under, Young Lives local research teams engages with caregivers through surveys and structured conversations to develop a comprehensive picture of childhood in these contexts. In each country, the local research team develops long-term, trusting relationships with the families. They get to know the family schedules and meet with them when and where it's most convenient. Some researchers accompany families on their errands and activities, which might mean conducting interviews in the kitchen while they're cooking or in the field while they're tending to their crops. This image, for example, is from an interview with a Vietnamese mother in her own home where she runs a hat weaving business. This just so happened to be the best place for her, most convenient place to participate in the initiative. For community engagement practitioners who are not already embedded in the community they're working in, we recommend that you work with local trusted organizations who are already well established in the community. These organizations can help vouch for your initiative and help you build relationships with participants in the community. The second principle is to make engagement reciprocal. The best engagement processes are mutually beneficial where participants also feel like their time and efforts are worthwhile. Everyone has different motivations for participating in an engagement process. For young children, Activities need to be stimulating, interactive, and fun. For pregnant women and caregivers, especially those with low incomes, organizers may need to offer incentives from the outset. Depending on the context, sometimes it's appropriate to provide things such as groceries or transit passes. In other contexts, maybe it's referrals for services, information, or even money. If you're unsure of what type of compensation to provide, consult with local organizations who already work with your target group to see what is the most appropriate form of compensation for the context. So I want to talk a little bit about a project that we worked on last year. 880 Cities was hired by the city of West Palm Beach to engage community members on the future of a piece of vacant land, the one that you see here. Prior to this, the city's main method for community engagement was by hosting community meetings, typically in the evenings when families are busy having dinner and kids are doing homework. That said, those who attended these meetings were by no means representative of the entire community. To get the input of a broad range of voices on this project, including young children and families, we hosted a free, fun, family-friendly event in the vacant space and invited everyone to come. The community, however, was divided on whether or not the space should even cater to children. Some felt that the location was too dangerous and wasn't appropriate for children and families. Others felt like having a space for children and families in this community was actually a priority and that we should test it out. And so we said, we'll never know unless we actually try. So we worked with our partners, Better Block, and fellow community members to build low-cost, temporary prototypes of the improvements that people said that they wanted to see. We tested out the idea of a playground by using blue foam mobile blocks that kids could stack and create mini structures out of. We found an old tire on the side of the road and turned it into a tire swing. We built a miniature sports court on the street using temporary paint and duct tape. We built low-cost seating areas with shade and temporary landscaping. We even invited a festival programmer to host their annual music festival on the vacant site so that people who came to the festival would be able to see, test out, and provide their feedback on the prototypes. We made it a whole family-friendly experience. We surveyed families on site and recorded observations. We surveyed families on site and recorded observations about how many people were in the space and how they were using it. The children's area was by far the most popular prototype. Before testing out this idea, people were really divided on whether or not this vacant piece of land should be an area. Before this prototype, people were really divided on whether or not this area should even cater to children. After the prototypes, there was an overwhelming support for children's play areas to be incorporated into the final plans for the site. As far as making engagement reciprocal goes, the community saw this event as a way that the city was giving back. It was a fun, free event for the whole community. But the city also benefited from this process because a whole ton of people who normally wouldn't participate in city building processes tested out the prototypes and provided their input on what they liked and didn't like about it. Fast forward to today, the city of West Palm Beach is currently in the process of reconstructing this vacant space into a family-friendly park. The third principle is to make engagement playful. Children learn through playing. There are various types of play that we can use to engage our youngest citizens and their families in the city building process. Take, for instance, storytelling. Storytelling allows children to develop emotions and feelings such as empathy or fear by understanding and even relating to the roles characters play. Kaboom, an organization based in the United States, engages young children and families to design playgrounds and parks. Their facilitators use storytelling, along with these visual props, as a primary way to get young children to brainstorm ideas for things they'd want in a playground. Children can easily put themselves in a character's shoes and imagine themselves attempting the same tasks as the story's characters, which in this case is building a dream playground. Another way to make engagement playful is through open-ended drawing or art exercises that allow children to freely express their thoughts and outcome of the activity. This is a simple example of an activity by the Nature Learning Initiative out of North Carolina. They regularly use these sorts of activities with young children to inform the redesign of children's spaces, such as playgrounds and childcare centers. And the fourth principle is to make engagement a leadership opportunity. Children experience the world differently than adults. In addition to the difference in age and cognitive development, a child's viewpoint is also different because of their height, size, and abilities. Children see things differently. They may want to explore places by jumping, rolling, sliding, crouching, using all of their senses. This unique perspective is crucial to shaping inclusive cities. There are various ways for children to take leadership roles in the engagement process. For example, child-led tours are when a child walks a small group of people through a space identifying areas they most and least like. Facilitators can observe how the child plays and interacts in the space and gain insight into how and why they use the space. Similarly, children can use cameras to capture observations about their neighborhood. This image that you see here is from a project in Rio de Janeiro. The project was called Small Child in Focus, where children ages 4 and 5 were tasked with taking photos of their community. Afterwards, they would talk about the significance of the photos. They become the curators of these images, and what they choose to emphasize or exclude speaks volumes about their perceptions and preferences. These observations were subsequently used to inform policies for shaping this community in Rio de Janeiro into a child-friendly place. Another way to make engagement a leadership opportunity is to use older children as a proxy for younger children. The child-to-child method empowers older children to be the leaders of their own systems of engagement and breaks away from the traditional adult-child engagement relationship. We actually have Trisha Young and Celine Woznica here from Child to Child, and they can tell you a lot more about this program than I can. So I'm going to turn this part of the presentation over to them.
Celine, can you see the screen?
I cannot. I think I might have lost.
Rosanna and Angela, can you see the screen? It says to me that I'm screen sharing. It tells me that
we can see the screen.
You can see the screen. Thank you very much. Okay. Okay, so Celine, I'm switching to the presenter. I'm switching to the presenters page.
Okay.
Over to you.
Okay, I'm sorry. I had connections. Okay, thank you. So, well, first of all, I want to thank you, Amanda. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, all good.
Great. Okay, thank you, Amanda and Rosanna, for this opportunity to share with you our work, our mission, and our global experience in promoting child participation. I was fascinated by your presentation and learning about your successes in West Palm Beach and Kaboom. I'm very familiar with Kaboom. So anyway, it was wonderful. So we are honored to be able to present actually a blending of two of the case studies that are in the book that the 8 cities produced. One is more about building the capacity of adults to engage children, and then the second one is a focus on getting ready for school, which works with older children to engage younger children. So I'm Celine Woznica, and I am talking to you from Chicago, but my work is more focused in Latin America, building the capacity and supporting programs that promote child-to-child methodology and child participation in the Americas. Okay, Tricia?
Hi, I'm speaking to you from London. Hello, everyone. I'm the director of Child to Child globally, and Celine is one of my colleagues, and we're, to reiterate what Celine has said, delighted to have this opportunity to present our work. Okay, so should I... It's telling me my internet is unstable. I hope it's okay.
I think we're good. Continue.
Okay. So this is just an introduction to us as an organisation. Many of you will probably be familiar with Child to Child. We were one of the earliest organisations that developed practical approaches to engage children in issues that affected them in relation to health, education, development. And so we've pioneered a number of practical approaches that enable children to meaningfully engage as partners for change on issues that are affecting them in their communities. And so our fundamental starting point is that children are agents of change, and with the right type of support from the trusted adults in their lives, they can work together to change their world. This is our mission. It's very much aligned with Article 12 of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And it's so we practically work with organisations to build their capacity to meaningfully engage children in a range of activities. So for example, we work with organisations like UNICEF. I was in Ethiopia last week with UNICEF looking at the scale up of a child-to-child programme for early years. We also work with international organisations, supporting them. We recently provided some capacity development support to Save the Children in Haiti to enable them to embed child-centred approaches to disaster risk reduction. And we also work with local organisations in many communities around the world. And so the focus of all of our work in relation to these agencies is to really develop.
Okay.
With children.
Okay.
Over to you, Celine.
Okay, great. So, you know, when reviewing this webinar with Rosanna, you know, it was clear that we don't need, we're talking to a converted population of participants. You all believe in participation, but just to establish the fact that we, you know, we want to make sure we're using the same language. For us, participation does matter. We feel very strongly about it. And we do work with older children and younger children. The focus that you have on small children, we feel is so important because it's often overlooked. We uphold the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, but as you can see in this picture, I don't think you can see it so clearly, but it's just a beautiful photo of a young girl in Peru. And it says on her shirt, you can see the Bernard Van Leer logo on it, children are organized to express their opinions and to take action. Okay, next one. Next one, okay. So without reading all of this, because you certainly, you know, you will look at these slides later and you can review it, but we do believe that participation empowers. So in my personal experience in training young people, adult facilitators, and then, you know, youthful facilitators in the child-to-child methodology, when we have our practice sessions in the afternoon, we usually get like 8 to 12. We kind of target 8 to 12-year-olds. But, you know, the 8 to 12-year-olds, particularly in developing countries, are in charge of babysitting, are taking care of the younger siblings. So they'll bring in their younger siblings who may be 3 to 6. And the 3 to 6-year-olds are just phenomenal. So we find that we have very positive experiences with them. They take on leadership roles in inclusivity, empathy, and spreading the message, as long as we use age-appropriate techniques. And that's what we'd like to share with you. the younger siblings jumped right into the program and were wonderful. So we find that in the first step, if we begin to empower them with self-efficacy, with self-confidence, that they have this experience of working and participating, hearing their voices heard, then that moves them to building partnerships, sharing understanding among them, and then that, of course, moves to really challenging issues, violations, influencing decisions. In my experience, this will take a couple of months to get over to the third section over there. We often start with sort of kind of low-hanging fruit, easier issues, and then as the children feel empowered and they find their voice, then they're really actually ready to recognize and fight for their rights and to hold duty bearers accountable. Okay, next slide. Tricia?
Yep, it's there.
Yep.
Is it coming up?
Yeah.
Sorry, this is the challenge of doing this presentation transatlantically.
Yeah.
Can you see it, Celine?
Yeah. Oh. Okay, so I absolutely love this slide. Consultative, there's the 3 different forms of participation. I'm sure all of you are familiar with it, but we do want to make sure that we have we're on the same page in terms of understanding the terms. I love this slide because it indicates that there are 3 different forms of participation and different situations call for different forms. Interlocking wheels, as on one form of participation, can and should promote others. For example, consultative participation can help landscape professionals design an urban setting, and in the process help children develop their voice and learn the structures for advocacy. Children in community settings organizing and advocating for change, which could be child-led participation, can learn with whom they work in the future, collaborative participation, and the leaders will learn with whom they can contact for consultation. So, you know, working in the different areas and the different forms as like interlocking wheels, keep all of it moving so that the children can participate in appropriate ways for the appropriate cause. Okay, next one.
Yeah, and this is just to highlight the quality framework that needs to be in place to ensure that participation is meaningful and ethical, and that these different elements need to be taken into account in order for children to have a meaningful experience of participation. As Celine said, I won't do a deep dive into this. You'll get all of these slides and resources afterwards. We're happy to share.
Okay, so we really enjoyed reading your report and learning about the key engagement principles, that engagement with children 0 to 5 should be comfortable and convenient, reciprocal, playful, and a leadership opportunity. Child to Child embodies these 4 key principles, and we look forward to sharing with you some of our programs. So in Child to Child, we promote child-appropriate, replicable techniques to engage children in action research methodology. So the children name issues, they reflect on the issues, and they take action. Here I have a couple of pictures of things. All of the techniques that we use are replicable. You can use it with resources that you have on hand. For example, in that one picture on the left-hand side, it's what we call the magic carpet ride, and the children with really good facilitation and the adults that are shaking the sheet, they go on an imaginary carpet ride to a magic land. And what do they look to see in that when they want to find in that magic land? So that's another way of children expressing themselves. In the middle picture, we have children coloring a village map. I've had an incredible experience with this, particularly in the Chicago area, where they may highlight different things. In Chicago, we talk about areas where they feel danger, and that's another road. And then in the lower right-hand corner, you see a picture which really embodies to me a lot of the importance of the playfulness. We always start with a game. We always have the children and the adults engage in a game. Actually, this is often very hard. In many cultures, children and adults don't play games. But when the children and adults are playing the games together, that breaks down the adult-child dyad, and the children are more likely to express themselves, to open up and to share their thoughts because they have just played a fun game with adults. Next slide. Next slide. Tricia?
Yeah, I've just done it.
Okay. Just briefly, I want to talk about the Centro de Desarrollo Étnico, which is in Lima. It's another Bernard Van Leer sponsored project, and I really feel that it embodies so much of the 4 principles that you're talking about. The adults received formation in child-to-child action research methodology. In this case, the older children in many ways were mentors for the younger children because the facilitators worked in community groups, and so they'd be multi-age. But the younger children found their own safe space. They were empowered to celebrate their ethnicity. This program focused on Afro-Peruvians fighting racism in their institutions and government agencies and communities. And the children learned to promote diversity in positive ways. So I just love this picture of the small children on a stage presenting, but that little banner to the left says in Spanish, "Being happy is the color of my identity." And definitely the program embodied the 4 principles because it was comfortable, it was convenient, it was in their barrios, it was reciprocal, very playful, and it allowed for leadership opportunities, especially among the older children. Next one.
Okay, so thanks, Celine. I'm going to talk about some of our other programs that have been taking place globally, and this again epitomizes a program where older children support younger children to develop sort of early learning competencies, but also confidence, a sense of agency, the ability to speak out. It was a program that we originally developed in partnership with UNICEF. It's called Getting Ready for School. And it really, it does what it says on the tin. It's about promoting school readiness amongst populations of children who don't have access to formal preschool opportunities. So, you know, in many countries around the world, children enroll in school late and not in the, you know, without the basic learning competencies they need to succeed in school. And this often means that they drop out before completing a basic primary education, which is devastating for all children, but has particularly negative effects for girls. So the Getting Ready for School program is an informal community-based program where older children are trained as young facilitators and they engage preschoolers in their community settings. So I was in Ethiopia in the last fortnight, visiting the Getting Ready for School that the Ethiopian government has taken it to scale. And the activities literally take place in someone's compound. The activities are playful, they're reciprocal, you know, it was very interesting. One of the educational officials who accompanied us on a visit described the program as authentic, and it's because it's embedded within the cultural context which is familiar to children. There's nothing alien about it. It simply builds on what's already there. So child to child is very much an asset strength-based approach, harnessing and capitalizing on what children want to do, which is play and engage with each other. And it leads to the program was evaluated using the randomized controlled trial evaluation methodology, which is very beloved of donors, and it was found to deliver really significant benefits for children involved in the program. So for younger children, it really in Yemen, for example, it increased on-time enrollment from 34% to 83% compared to children involved and not involved in the program. And for the young facilitators, as you would expect, it develops their leadership skills and potential, and really supports them to start to become community leaders in their own right. We had a really delightful story last week in Ethiopia. One of the young children, who's a young learner, spoke out at a community event recently. The event was there, it was a community celebration, and the teachers were on the stage, you know, the teachers from the formal school system were on the stage and were being acknowledged for their contribution by the community. And one of the young children, who we call a young learner, put his hand up and said, "Where's my teacher?" talking about his young facilitator, because as far as he was concerned, that was the person that he looked to in his community for leadership and support. So this proxy engagement from older to younger children is incredibly effective. And I'm going to talk about how the program can be adapted. We were actually implementing a version of this program in Sierra Leone. And in addition to the core early learning program, we'd incorporated an additional focus on life skills education, because of when we did the needs assessments, we'd discovered that there were significant child protection concerns in relation to child labour, violence and abuse. And so, as we do in all of our programs, we contextualise. We make sure that you know, we don't just take something off the shelf and take it and implement it. We work with and through local partners to understand the contextual reality of children. You know, adapting storybooks to make sure that the fruit the pictures of the fruit reflect the local fruit that they'll find in the market, the names, the way that people, you know, are dressed. So we you know, really ensure that and I think this is why the program is felt to be so authentic. And we'd incorporated this additional focus on life skills education because of the issues we'd found. We'd also implemented an adapted version of the program in Pakistan, in a community that was very affected by a range of disasters. So they'd been impacted by floods, they'd had an earthquake, they were also affected periodically by insurgencies. So we incorporated a focus on child-centered disaster risk reduction to equip children with the skills they needed to identify and mitigate the risks that they were exposed to. So really highlighting, you know, again, sort of using these child-to-child, older children to younger children approaches to mobilise children as agents of change, making significant contributions to their communities. We'd been implementing the program in Sierra Leone for a couple of years, and it was that we had a cholera outbreak. So, you know, that was the first major disruption. And then about a year, so that was, I think, 2013. And then in 2014, I'm sure you'll all remember very clearly the outbreak of Ebola, an unprecedented global health crisis. And sadly, the community where we were working was the community where the Ebola epidemic first came into the country. So it was particularly impacted. And it took a while for the Sierra Leonean government and also the global community more generally to mobilise, but actually one of the first responses was to stop public gatherings and to close schools. So children who've been involved in our programme weren't actually able to continue with their learning and education. We knew we couldn't just leave, you know, we couldn't just stop everything. So in collaboration with our local partner, we identified that actually adapting the programme and to taking it onto the radio, using child-centered, playful radio broadcasts would be a way of continuing to engage children with the early learning content in the Getting Ready for School core package, and also to address some of the broader issues that were affecting children in the wake of Ebola. So what we did was we engaged some of the children who had been previously involved as young facilitators. So these are the older children who work with the groups of preschoolers to promote early learning, and they were trained as young journalists. And then they were deployed amongst their peers within their community to capture feedback and stories from children about the impact of the Ebola crisis on them and on their community. As I'm sure many of you will be aware, often in humanitarian situations, the perspectives of children can be really overlooked. You know, when the responses mobilise, children are often not at the forefront of anyone's thinking about how to respond to the issues that are impacting those communities. So as a consequence of mobilizing the children as young journalists, we were able to develop a film called, not a film, a radio series called Picking to Picking Talk. And the program comprised three key strands. One of which was story time, and this targeted the very young children. Telling my internet connection is unstable, I hope you can hear me. It targeted very young children using the learning content in the early learning package in getting ready for school. We work with local Sierra Leonean storytellers based in the UK and elsewhere to record really fun, dynamic, interactive, stories and songs to continue to support those children to, develop their early learning skills, and also to just give them a sense of hope at a time of really, really significant despair and challenge. We also developed a second strand in Picking to Picking Talk called Messages Through Music. And we worked in collaboration with the young journalists to develop a range of songs directly addressing some of the public health issues that were being were being experienced by children in that that unprecedented public health crisis. So, looking at hand washing, personal hygiene, what needed to happen in order to keep children safe in relation to the Ebola crisis. And as I mentioned previously, it had been cholera. So yeah, really equipping children with knowledge to keep them safe. And then finally, there was a strand called Under the Mango Tree, which really tackled some of the much more hard-hitting issues that were affecting older children in relation to, one of the young children spoke to the older young journalist about the absolute stigma and the fact that he was ostracized because he'd lost his family in the Ebola crisis. So through engaging and listening to his voice, he was supported to feel less isolated. And these programs were turned into radio broadcasts. They were broadcast using a community radio station. And it's a shame I'm unable to, my internet connection is not stable enough. I wanted to show you a short 3-minute film, which will circulate afterwards. You can see children acting, children as young journalists on that film, encouraging the community to support children who are impacted by Ebola, not to ostracize them, not to stigmatize them. So it was an incredibly powerful radio broadcast. I visited the community towards the end of the project period, and I was actually taken to one side by 2 dads in 2 separate communities who told me that through listening to the radio programs, they'd really understood what their young children were going through in the wake of that crisis. And it simply hadn't occurred to them. They weren't bad dads. They were simply contending with enormous pressure in the wake of this terrible situation. So in relation to child, if any of you are interested, we'd love to talk to you more about the programs that we run and the types of support that we can provide. A lot of our materials and resources are open source, copyright free. You can download them from our website. Feel very free to go and have a look and access whatever might be of interest to you. Of course, if you want additional support, you can drop myself or Celine a line in the first instance. If you go to CC Inquiries email address, you can access us and we'll see how we can best help you. I hope that you found this presentation interesting. And again, I'd really like to thank the team from 880 Cities for inviting us to present our work. And yeah, it's been fascinating to learn about the project in a broader sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Tricia and Celine. That was wonderful. So we're going to switch back to our presentation and do some concluding remarks, and then we'll take questions from the participants. So again, I want to reiterate that so much more detail is available in the report that is available on our website and on, of course, Bernard Van Leer's website. And the conclusion of the report also outlines some general ideas of what cities can do and which departments and city governments have a role to play in engaging these young children and their caregivers. So some of those key ideas include taking a more integrated and multi-sector approach, dedicating some consistent sources of funding for engagement, collecting data from and investing in frontline staff, or better use of existing frontline staff, and making participation free and accessible, and of course, engaging the entire community. And some of these may seem obvious, but in our experience, city planning and decision-making is often so concerned with capital costs and infrastructure that there is very little attention and resources dedicated to actually getting people engaged in a project, whether they're young or old or very young. So rather than go into detail on the recommendations of the report, I thought we could spend the last couple minutes just talking about what we learned, 880 Cities learned from this whole research process, excuse me, and then putting together the report. So things that we've kind of reflected on since we published the report and that are not necessarily in the report. So first is that the original question about thinking about who are the pioneer cities that are doing inclusive engagement with young children 0 to 5. Well, there really are no pioneer cities. What we only found is really that there are pioneering programs and practices. Many wonderful programs, but not really anything brought to scale at the citywide level. I wish I could sit here and say that there was, 5 top cities, but it's really not like that. Engaging children is often a low priority in city governments. Even lower priority is young children and caregivers, and even less information we can find on pregnant women. So even cities with the most sophisticated approaches to community engagement have fallen short. City planning departments can learn and better use the expertise of other sectors, such as education, public health, and community development. Engaging this target group doesn't necessarily mean a huge investment of resources, but using the frontline staff that are already out there and trained. We have also asked the question, is there a big difference from the engagement we do at 880 and what we learned for 0 to 5? So generally speaking, we found the key principles that Rosanna talked about are very much the same. However, because people with children are more protective of their time and you are dealing with very young children who are even more vulnerable, trust is an even more important aspect of the work that we do when we engage this group. And reaching them in their routines is also even more important and challenging. We also learned some really great new methodologies, some creative ideas that we're excited to use in our work with cities and share with you guys here today. So while we shared some best practices for methods to engage this group, what we now need to become concerned with is next practices, scaling up those good practices and figuring out how to operationalize them. We're also pushing for new models where the insights of young children, their caregivers are embedded into all levels and sectors of government. So we hope that this was useful and can give you some new tools and ways of thinking about the work that you are doing in cities all over the world, and also maybe validating some existing practices that you're already doing. So at this point, just wanted to say thank you again for joining us today, and we're happy to take some questions. Rosanna is going to pull up the question portal, and we'll do our best to answer them. We'll read them out and then answer them as we go.
Great. So if any of you have questions, I just encourage you to type it in the chat box. And the questions can be either for me and Amanda or for Tricia and Celine.
Also wanted to say thank you all for dealing with all the technical challenges we had today. So thanks for your patience with all of that. Yes.
There's a hand up, isn't there?
There is a hand up.
Yeah, Anantha Krishnan.
Okay, what I'm going to do is allow you to talk. So if you have your mic on, please go ahead. Anantha Krishnan, are you there?
Oh, we would love to know how you analyze.
Sorry, can you repeat the question again?
So Paulina has written, we would love to know how you analyze the material you gather from video. You talked about it in the child-to-child experience. Should I jump in with that, Rosanna? Yeah. Okay, Paulina.
Yeah, hello.
Oh, hi.
I'm sorry. Am I interrupting? There is a problem with my network.
It was okay. I was just going to respond to a question from Paulina, but go ahead.
Please carry on.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I'll just respond to this, and then I'll mute myself, and you can jump in. So, Paulina. So actually, what we had was we gathered a lot of audio content rather than videos because it was a radio program we produced. And sorry, splitting hairs slightly. And what we did was we organised the material thematically and organised the radio broadcasts around particular issues. So, for example, one of the programmes looked very much at, stigma, isolation, being ostracised. Another programme looked at the exponential rise in sexual violence that took place in the wake of the Ebola crisis and the steps that children could take to keep themselves safer. And one thing that I didn't have time to explain when I was giving the presentation is actually for the children who had been in the communities where we were working before the outbreak, they were all supported to listen to the radio programs in facilitated listener groups. And after the broadcasts, there were often panel discussions which included adult experts from the local community. So, for example, we had a minister from the Ministry of Women and Children's Affairs who was on a panel discussion following the broadcast about the rise in sexual violence. And children were supported to phone in to ask that minister why more wasn't being done to uphold the bylaws that were in place that were supposed to protect children. So, the programme was it wasn't a research initiative in the sense that we would have analysed data. We have had other programmes where we've worked with very young children to understand their experiences of participation. And in that instance, we did use that data in order to analyse. But this was much more about generating audio content that would speak directly to the issues facing children in the communities impacted by Ebola. So I hope that answers adequately. Yeah. And then that other Anantha Krishnan, you wanted to come in. I'll mute myself.
Yeah. Hello. It was pretty much interesting to listen to a few of the points because I'm an urban designer. I'm an architect urban designer. And I am working for a neighborhood plan based in India. So I'm from India. What I would like to ask is, like, we have a situation where we have the middle income family groups, the low income family groups, and of course the slums here in India and in the same neighborhood where I'm working. So we were actually thinking of bringing up children from all the three sections together and then getting the response out of them, because we want to ensure that whatever we design or whatever kind of neighborhood plan we do should be child friendly oriented, or it has to possess the child friendly character that, just as you said, should be safe for any child. So do you have any suggestions to hold up that kind of meetings or engagements where you actually can bring the children from all the three sections together? That exactly is my question.
Thanks for your question. So I just wanted to ask you, are they living all in the same neighborhood or different sections of the same, different parts of the neighborhood?
Okay, at present, they live in a single neighborhood, but I mean, yeah, they live in a single neighborhood only. But since it is a housing colony, they have well segregated buildings or locations within the same neighborhood where they stay.
I think my first thought is that it might be best to, for the first time that you engage the children, to engage them in spaces that they're familiar with. So don't take them to a place that's new. So if they're somewhat segregated, kind of engage one, the low income group in where they're comfortable, the middle income group in where they're comfortable first, because their responses and how they choose to express their ideas in those spaces might be different if you were to bring them all into a different place from the get-go. So maybe your first move is to engage them in places where they're already comfortable, and then for subsequent engagements, consider bringing them to a common space where they can interact.
And I think, just to add on that, I think that's a very good idea. Also, in terms of thinking about organizing meetings, we often talk about thinking beyond the 1 or 2 meetings, like thinking about creating a whole engagement strategy. Involves a number of different methods. So it's not just hosting a meeting, it could be a number of different events over the course of the project, however long you have to develop the neighborhood plan. But getting it done, developing that early on in the process will ensure a more successful process going forward and better engagement all around. So thinking beyond just a meeting, but maybe it's hosting a number of events, it's doing a few of those more focused sessions, as Rosanna mentioned, and actually getting the input from them of what they would like to do as well. Like when you do those initial meetings of what would you like to see happen in the neighborhood that would bring people together. They're often, the community is such a great resource of information and will tell you right away what will work and what won't work. We have experienced ourselves trying to do these engagements and had wonderful ideas of what we thought would work, and it fell totally flat because we didn't ask what they were interested in doing. So I think that's one of the key things to keep in mind.
Thank you. You got something to add up? Please.
Can I pop in for a minute?
Sure, please.
Yeah, I would really like to underscore what Rosanna and Amanda said, particularly if it's over a period of time, because we have found that when children see that what they have said has been acted on, they feel very empowered and very confident in their voice. So it's a process. Over a period of time, the children will share more as long as they see what they are sharing is really acknowledged and acted upon. Okay, done.
Thank you.
So I'm just
Thank you, Celine.
Thank you.
Thank you for your questions.
Thanks a lot. That was really a very
questions. The
session.
next question in the chat is from Janet from Kenya. She works in Kidogo in informal settlements of Kibera and would love to hear about whether we have some ways to help parents and caregivers in engaging with their children, particularly under 3 when they are casual laborers.
I could come in with something in relation to that. So this is, we're currently actually working with UNICEF in Sierra Leone on precisely this, and we've done 2 things for them, which build on the experience of our Picking to Picking Talk radio series with children impacted by Ebola. So the first initiative, which was funded by the Open Society Foundation, we produced a radio program called Famble Talk, which means family talk. And it's a 6-part radio program, and it uses a mixture of formats. So some chat, some expert informants, a bit of a soap opera. Each program is about half an hour long, and it looks at different aspects related to supporting optimal development of children in a community-based setting. So this is very much about introducing parents who themselves wouldn't have had access to early childhood opportunities, maybe don't really understand the importance of investing in their children's early years and the critical role that support can play in fostering optimal development. So it looks at things ranging from breastfeeding to talking with and playing with your children, to alternatives to violent discipline. And each program within the Famble Talk series addresses a different thematic area. In addition, we're just, and this could be something that's very relevant if you come back in a few months, we're just about to start again, working with UNICEF in Sierra Leone to adapt a community-based toy making resource that Child to Child developed some time ago and needs updating and revising. And so we're going to produce a series of booklets which are going to be very visual, so completely accessible to people with limited literacy, to equip them with an understanding about how to develop, access community-based resources to develop toys for children. And each book there'll be 3 books in the series that are targeting different age ranges, and each book will also incorporate ideas to address to develop toys for children with a range of different abilities and needs, so that they'll be designed to be completely inclusive. We haven't started the work yet, but I would hope that we'll be starting the work in the next few months. So please feel free to check in with us. As it is, we can give you the existing toy making guide resource, and you can certainly use that in your own setting to promote awareness of parents and caregivers about the critical importance of providing access to play using locally available resources and materials. So that resource is already available, but if you want something that's updated and maybe more relevant to your context as well, do check in with us maybe in a few months, and we should have something to share.
Thanks, Tricia. We have another question. It says, to 880 cities, have you come across any project where several city departments collaborated? Any good example of cross-department initiatives? So we have one thing before we go into a specific project, I would say that generally cities are very entrenched in their silos, and we have through our work, we try a lot to kind of break those silos and create some momentum around convening around a new way of thinking about cities. And the 880 concept helps us with that. But certainly the systems that are in place are quite entrenched, and it's a work in process. And so I have one particular example that comes to mind, and that's in the city of Toronto, not a project that we specifically worked on, but the city has developed growing up guidelines for developers working in the city to create more child-friendly spaces in vertical communities in Toronto. We're experiencing a much more increase in density in the downtown, and there has been a collaboration from public health as well as city planning, as well as, I believe, transportation. We're involved in the development of these development guidelines for developers on how to improve the built environment, particularly in tower communities. So that's one example. We've also, through our work with the Knight Foundation in the US, a lot of the work that we do with those cities is giving them the leadership and capacity to sort of change the way that they work in their cities and break down those silos and come up with new systems. So for example, in West Palm Beach that Rosanna talked about, they were also part of a project we did where we brought city leaders to Copenhagen in Denmark to learn from some of the transformations that have happened in that city. From a sort of car-oriented to a more people-friendly public realm. And one of the takeaways from that session was the Parks Department has sort of completely rehashed how they do planning in their parks and public spaces, and it's a combined with roads, with transportation and parks and around the public realm. So that's an example of a more sort of systemic change in the city. And West Palm Beach was curious about this way of working and they've developed a kind of whole new department that that also works collaboratively with the transportation and parks around public life, how to bring public life back into the city. So cross-department collaboration, starting a new department, so it's not exactly the best practice, I think, but also a great sign that they're moving in the right direction of aligning around a new idea of how to improve public life in the city for children and for older adults and all users.
Hi, I just, is it okay if I jump in to respond to a question from Lena? Is that okay? She's asked that they're working on a community engagement strategy, and she would like to have some input regarding evaluation methodologies. A few years ago, with funding from the Oak Foundation, a consortium of organisations, including, Save the Children Plan International, World Vision, some of the big organisations came together to develop a monitoring and evaluation framework and toolkit for children's participation. If you, I'd be very happy to share that. It looks at the scope. What it does is it gives you tools and resources to look at the scope, quality, and outcomes of children's participation. So depending on what aspect you want to look at, there's lots of information in the toolkit that will help you look at different aspects. Is it about assessing whether or not an enabling environment has been created, or are you trying to determine what impact your work has had? And it's there's a series of guides, each of which is supported by a range of tools that will help you to look at these different aspects of children's participation to assess what difference you're making. So please feel free to contact me, and I can happily signpost you to those resources. I think they should be on our website.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to say that this toolkit is also available in Spanish, and I'm fluent in Spanish, so I don't know to whom we are broadcasting, but it's also available in Spanish, so this resource is available for all of you in Latin America.
Thanks, Celine. So I am just cognizant of time, so we're sitting now at 9:15 a.m. Toronto time, so we're about 15 minutes over, and so kind of time to wrap up, but these questions are fantastic, and we're certainly available to answer any additional questions individually. Please contact Celine or Tricia or myself or Rosanna, and we would be happy to point you to the right resources or answer your questions. In terms of, there's a question about evaluation. The 4 principles are a great place to start, yeah, we'd be happy to share all the tools that we've done in that realm, some of which are on the website, or some might be more specifically catered to your specific question. So again, just wanted to say thank you so much to Tricia and Celine for your contributions to the report and to this webinar. And also wanted to say thank you so much to the Bernard Van Leer Foundation, for your support and embarking with us, 880 Cities, on this new project. We are completely bitten by the 0 to 5 bug, I guess you could say. We're certainly interested in this particular age group and their the influence that they can have on cities. So thank you all for joining us, and more to come next as we scale up, hopefully.
I'd just like to say thank you for inviting us today. I hope that what we've presented was relevant and interesting. We'd love to hear from you. You've got our details. Do drop us a line. Thank you.
And greetings from Chicago, and thank you as well.
Okay.
Have a wonderful Women's Day, everyone.
Yeah. Happy Women's Day.
Happy Women's Day.
Yeah. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
How do we stop it?